Welcome to Truth and Lies Radio, a program dedicated to revealing the truth and exposing the lies about the destruction of your freedom and prosperity and what you can do about it. And now, your host, former Washington right-wing activist, international living, banking and asset protection author and expert, and American patriot in exile, David Finzer.
This is David Finzer broadcasting for the next 2 hours from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia, on my 5,124th day of voluntary exile in protest from an ever less free America. To comment during the program right now, you can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, all one word, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. As soon as our new studio is finished, you will also be able to call in toll-free from the U.S. and Canada, or Skype from around the world and join the conversation. Also remember to check out our Facebook and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. According to the big clock on truthandliesradio.com's FATCA/Taxmageddon Day countdown page, your taxes will skyrocket and your worldwide financial privacy will expire in 150 days, 13 hours, 52 minutes, and 7 seconds. Well, the fact that the government wastes money is, I don't suppose, news, but the way the General Services Administration, which is sort of a catch-all group that provides general services to the various government agencies, has gone wild in Las Vegas, has gotten a lot of people really torqued. Florida Representative John Mica says that wasteful practices by the agency could top billions when you add it all up. He said it has to be the poster child for bad management. They certainly aren't the poster child for bulimia, that's for sure. During Wednesday's hearing on the embattled agency by the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which was chaired by the Republican, he noted they had one individual, he made about $85,000 in his base pay, but got $115,000 in overtime. That's more than a whole lot of people get working full-time in decent jobs. He said this is incredible. Businesses would go bankrupt if they operated on that basis. But these folks have been on a steady regimen of using up taxpayer money, eating up public funds, and not being responsible, and then stonewalling Congress, and when they do answer, giving different answers. This is a perfect example of the war that's going on between the executive department, which doesn't want to give any answers, but spending all the money, and at least some responsible members of Congress that are trying to rein in the debt. Now, we know about a lot of the big public boondoggles. We know about Obamacare. We know about the big bank bailouts. We know about the companies too big to fail. But there is an awful lot of pork, and I thought that cartoon was particularly appropriate, inside the government itself. It's been built in year by year. The Democrats, of course, had control of Congress, both houses of Congress, for many, many, many years, from the Great Depression up until the contract with America. They had control of the House of Representatives all but 2 years. And the House of Representatives, of course, is where all money bills have to originate. And they have managed to bring the pork home. That's why the state of West Virginia, from which former Dean of the Senate, Robert Byrd, who was also incidentally a former Ku Klux Klan member, but the Democrats, that was okay because he was a Democrat and he really had changed his ways. If he'd been a Republican, he would have been hounded throughout his career because he was so powerful in the democratically controlled Senate that all kinds of U.S. government departments have branches in West Virginia. Not because West Virginia is centrally located, because it isn't. Not because West Virginia has easy access, because it doesn't. Simply because he was a senior senator with a lot of pull. Money is not spent by the United States government based on need. It's based on political pull. And they have all kinds of protections. The only thing they can't do, the government employees can't do, is go on strike. Ronald Reagan sort of made that point pretty clearly when he fired all the air traffic controllers. But they can do all kinds of other things. And you have people in the senior, what they call the senior executive service, which most people haven't heard of, which are just one step below political appointees that get incredible salaries, are answerable hardly to anyone, and pretty much do what they want. Frankly, I think it's time to consider rolling back the civil service system completely and returning to what Andrew Jackson called the spoils system. He said, like to the victors belong the spoils. Think about this. If every government job possible could be appointed by the person who got elected president, then at least they would be carrying out his policies, because they'd want the president to get reelected. Now, I don't know that it could be any worse. You say, well, gee, that would allow Obama to appoint a lot of people. Yes, they're already bad. At least it would give a conservative president a chance to have people on his side appointed at every level. Anyway, now we have to break for 5 minutes for a commercial. I will be back. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. When we come back, we'll talk about the House and the IRS. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. During the commercial break, I got an email from one of my listeners, from Frank, who said, Finzer, are you out of your mind? You want to abolish the civil service? Yes, in fact, I really do want to abolish the civil service. If you look at the history of it, the civil service was put in place by reformers to, quote, abolish corruption. The civil service is now completely and totally corrupt. So if it was put in place to abolish corruption, it is now corrupt. Let's get rid of it. The civil service now consists of millions of people, all of whom vote to keep themselves in jobs and vote themselves raises. Try to vote against it. Try to represent Northern Virginia or Maryland, the places within driving distance of the District of Columbia, which of the top 10 richest counties in the United States, I think 8 are right there. Try to represent them without being totally on the side of the civil service and see how far you get. I would far rather see every member of the executive branch serve at the pleasure of the President of the United States. Civil service is a new thing. It's not part of the Constitution. It's not even mentioned. In fact, it gives executive authority to the President of the United States. I remember growing up when every first-class postmaster in the United States was appointed by the President of the United States. And you got good mail service, and if you didn't, you voted against the President or his party the next time around. All the President can do now is appoint this thin layer below the top of the cabinet members that are called Schedule C appointees. It's one step below the top political appointees that are confirmed by Congress, and the President can appoint those. But the mass of the civil service, of course, belong to government service unions, and they also are almost all big government people because they gain by big government. And they need to be able to lose their jobs just like you and I. And I think we would find government a lot more responsive, maybe good and maybe bad, but I don't know how the heck it could get much worse than it is today. I mean, look at a local level where your county civil servants. Now, I don't know, they're civil servants, but there's a lot more room in most states for the elected officials in the counties to get rid of people who don't do a good job or cause problems. And they are responsive because they have to be responsible to someone who gets elected. Why shouldn't that system work for the country as a whole? Obviously, an intelligent president, properly advised, would not fire everyone. There are people who do a good job, just the number is decreasing. And so they shouldn't have special rights. Again, we're creating a country full of special rights for special people. The worst thing is the civil servants are doing it on our nickel. And it shows with the party in Las Vegas, the Secret Service and their prostitutes that were talked about some months ago. All of these people think that they are above the rules and the system stinks and should be abolished. And I vote with Andrew Jackson, to the victor belongs the spoils. Now, let's talk about perhaps the worst example of the civil service, the IRS. Last week, the House of Representatives voted with bipartisan support, 251 to 165, to approve an amendment to the Red Tape Reduction Act that would include the recently adopted IRS regulation requiring reporting on non-resident alien interest deposit information among the regulations that would be delayed until employment drops below 6%. In other words, they voted to stop this non-resident alien interest deposit information being given to foreign governments. That, of course, is going to be disastrous if it goes into effect for the United States economy. People are already starting to take money out of the United States because the United States has been the world's biggest offshore center for everyone except Americans. When Bill Clinton merely proposed such an action, hundreds of millions of dollars left the United States the first week. Now, the House has taken a first and necessary step in taking back the power to pass regulation from an IRS agency that's gone rogue. I mean, they do not have the power to make laws. They're supposed to merely enforce the tax laws. With passage of this rule, Treasury Secretary Geithner and the Obama regime has usurped once again the authority of Congress to determine how best to attract much-needed and foreign investment in the U.S. Thanks to the leadership of Congressman Posey, the House began taking that authority back. I hope the Senate will follow suit and then for this temporary delay to be made permanent. Congress has long opposed agency efforts to implement the reporting regulation, which undermines more than 90 years of congressional intent on foreign investment. Each time the issue of foreign deposits has come up, Congress has specifically decided not to tax it nor ask for it to be reported. The IRS facilitating taxation by other governments will have the same economic impact as if the U.S. taxed it directly, thus undermining the clear intent of congressional policy. The IRS has also flaunted legal requirements for regulatory enactments, such as requirements that economically significant rules be accompanied by a cost-benefit analysis. They have never conducted a proper analysis because there are no direct benefits to which they can point. A study by the Mercatus Center on an earlier, more limited, and thus less damaging version of this stupid rule estimated the U.S. would lose $88 billion, that's B for billion, for big bucks, in foreign investment, well above the $100 million impact necessary to trigger the cost-benefit analysis. A whole heck of a lot more above that analysis. But it hasn't been done because they're civil servants, because the IRS is special, and the IRS, of course, then targets congressmen who go after it. So I fully expect this congressman has got to be straight up, and the members of the House who voted for it have to have their taxes in order, or they're going to be subject to an audit too, because that's the way the Obama administration plays. It goes after the people that it doesn't like, that oppose its policy. This will take billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars in foreign investment out of the United States at a crucial time. This will mean the Fed will end up printing more money, and this is like playing Russian roulette with bullets in 5 of the 6 chambers. The only way I can figure out that this makes sense is that Obama wants to cause an economic crisis as an excuse for more and more imperial rule. Now, the Senate is also going after our friends at the IRS. 4 U.S. senators are demanding details from Treasury Secretary Geithner regarding a recent plan to impose significant financial burdens on U.S. institutions in exchange for international compliance with the ridiculous and burdensome FATCA, Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act law. The letter from Senators Rand Paul, Jim DeMint, Mike Lee, and Saxby Chambliss questions Secretary Geithner over a new plan to enter into an agreement, well, I've already reported on, with 5 European nations committed to automatic exchange of tax information. Now, of course, remember, this is being done by an executive agreement, so it doesn't have to go to the Senate for approval, thus again violating the Constitution and getting around the elected representatives of the people. In addition to pointing out the odd lack of identifying information accompanying the initial joint statement by the Treasury and 5 European partner countries, such as the name of the authors, the letter echoes several key arguments long offered by the Center for Freedom and Prosperity, a very good organization in Washington you should support. 1, a lack of clear congressional authority to engage in this policy making at the agency level. 2, the absence of any evidence that the Treasury has weighed the costs and benefits related to FATCA. 3, the threat to privacy and human rights and the potential misuse of personal data posed by the new reporting rules, including by a recently adopted IRS regulation requiring the domestic reporting of interest paid to non-resident alien accounts. And 4, the disturbing role played by the OECD in developing domestic tax policy. Now, for those of you who've forgotten, the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, is the international agency that the rich countries belong to that wants tax harmonization and hates tax avoidance, legal or not, hates offshore, and is totally operated from Paris by civil servants, all of whom, because they're international civil servants, operate tax-free. Isn't that hypocritical? Well, now we have to break for 6 minutes for the news and a commercial, but when we come back, we'll talk about China looking to buy the Keystone oil pipeline. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Don't go away. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. To comment during the program, you can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. As soon as our new studio is finished, you will also be able to call in via phone or Skype and join the conversation. Well, China looks like it's moving into the Keystone Pipeline project. You know, I sometimes wonder what goes on in the minds of the people who run the United States government. They can't make so many stupid decisions on purpose. They rejected the Keystone Pipeline, which would be a secure means of delivering oil to the United States overland from Canada, our nearest neighbor, the longest undefended border in the world, in favor of running these floating time bombs, these big super tankers that have to go through the narrow little Straits of Hormuz right by Iran and Iraq, and they just don't want to make the intelligent choice. So, with the American rejection of the Keystone Pipeline, Red China has stepped into the breach, offering $15.1 billion for the Canadian company Nexen. Now, this is just the latest evidence of stronger trade ties between Canada and China. The United States has reason to worry because its close friendship with Canada, which was pretty rocky actually during the Vietnam War years. If you remember, the Canadians had a prime minister by the name of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who really was not very nice to the United States at all. His policy was that he had to be equally close to both of his neighbors, the United States and the Soviet Union, so he straddled the fence and sort of made life miserable for America in a lot of ways. Nevertheless, the countries have maintained a peaceful and prosperous relationship on the continent for more than 100 years. It's possible Canada may hold off approving the deal for now and wait and see what happens in the U.S. presidential election, and a reversal of the Keystone decision would change everything. But once again, this is just one of those things that does not make sense to me. You get oil from next door, or you bring oil from halfway around the world through the most dangerous or potentially dangerous narrows in the world. I don't understand. Again, it seems like there's a pattern of wanting to make bad things happen as an excuse to make even more bad things happen. Well, some people think I'm outspoken, but compared to Harlem pastor the Reverend James David Manning, I'm almost a diplomat. Reverend Manning delivered a stem-winder sermon to his flock with such passion, he was overcome with so much emotion he had trouble catching his breath. He called out to his black flock to regain honor. 15 people killed while Obama was in the town of Chicago, he screamed out recently from his video pulpit. Now, the following is an exact quote. These are not my words. These are the Reverend Manning's words. I want to make that perfectly clear. Quote, "Only a nigger would do that. No other word describes such a lack of honor. The debauchery, killing each other in Chicago, Detroit, New York, and no outcry. The only word that describes this social behavior is nigger," unquote, says the Reverend Manning. The Harlem preacher who has been roundly denounced by the country's left-wing establishment, including, of course, the mainstream media, has even been investigated by the FBI, but then so have I. So what? He's telling his people he's disgusted by the subversion of America's Constitution, by our courts, our Congress, our media, our police, even the Clintons, Sarah Palin, Bill O'Reilly, and John McCain, for protecting Obama even as they ignore the Obama eligibility questions. This matter cannot be resolved by the election, Manning said. He preaches as he fears only blood running in America's streets in a redo of our civil war over slavery can wash away the stain of hypocrisy and delusion gripping our land. The deaths of black men killed by other black men are ignored by our current establishment. Only if someone white kills a black man is there any uproar. That was all a quote from Reverend Manning. I love America, he says. He compared the sin of slavery that started the first Civil War with sins of hypocrisy and abuse of the U.S. Constitution happening in America's halls of power. Quote, "Leaders don't get upset when blacks kill blacks because black people have no honor," unquote, he says. He stresses to his followers the hypocrisy of black-on-black crime being ignored versus the uproar over the few instances when whites attack blacks. This is a man of great courage. Because to say those things, and I'm not just talking about using the N-word, but to say those things publicly and strike out against the establishment takes great faith and great honor, I think, because he's telling the truth as he sees it, and most of which I'm frankly have to say I agree with. There are people who are deliberately causing racial tension in the United States, who are trying to balkanize the United States by characterizing everybody in groups. You know, they start with this pseudoscience called sociology, and then they build it up and lump us all into little groups, and they use this by playing one group off against the other, and every time that they do, both groups lose, and the Constitution loses, and the rule of law loses as well, and that is bad for America. Now, former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin says that the GOP establishment is embracing the status quo, and then that's not a good thing. But former Governor Palin is not one of the brightest bulbs in the world. I have to say. I attack Obama all the time, but I attack him as I see him. Because first she attacks them for being the GOP establishment for supporting the status quo, and then she says she strongly supports Mitt Romney as the Republican presidential candidate. You've got to have one or the other. That's like being a little bit pregnant. It can't happen. You can't. Mitt Romney is the epitome of the Republican establishment. I mean, she's crazy. People are tired. She said, we can't afford what's going on. We can't afford who's been running for Congress. But she really obviously doesn't understand what she's talking about, and as such, it deserves to be ignored. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. We'll talk about how Obama's killed jobs when we come back in 5 minutes. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. The Heritage Foundation, noted Washington conservative think tank, sent out an email today that started out, has any Obama policy not killed jobs lately? And I thought that was something worth looking at. Congress is headed off for its long vacation and campaign season, fleeing from Washington as the unemployment rate rises precipitously. According to the Labor Department's July jobs report, the unemployment rate was up to 8.3%, and that's the official figures. Who knows what the real figures are? 12.8 million Americans are out of work, and 5.2 million have been out of work for at least half a year. The administration's lack of progress on free trade agreements has killed job creation. The continued moratorium on oil drilling, along with new regulations, has killed job creation. Mr. Obama's refusal to build the Keystone XL pipeline killed jobs. Ever-increasing Environmental Protection Agency regulation kills jobs. Extending unemployment insurance, which is part of a failed socialist stimulus package, even though it was cloaked in a so-called humanitarian gesture, killed jobs. Even increasing deficit spending has a job-killing effect, the opposite of what Mr. Obama says he believes in. And then there's Obamacare, which, if it goes into full effect, will be one of the biggest job killers of modern times. To all of this, President Obama said, we tried our plan and it worked. Now, my question is, what is his plan? There seems to be, at least through today's news, there seems to be a common thread, which is that Mr. Obama, who is certainly not stupid, evil, arrogant, ambitious, imperious, all of those words apply, but stupid is not one to which I would apply. All of those things are hurting America, and he's talking about how his plan worked. One has to wonder, what is his real plan for America? There are plenty of conspiracy theorists out there who have all kinds of ideas on what can happen. I'm not sure why. I think he is trying to create a situation, which he's been trying to do since the beginning of his administration, to create a situation in which those who get more from the government permanently outnumber those who give to the government. So those who get more back than they pay out in taxes outnumber those who get less. This way he has a permanent majority for all of these stupid programs. That's the most benign interpretation that one can give. There are other worse interpretations, and when I can't forget things like the Patriot Act, which he promised to fix or get rid of, the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the Patriot Act on steroids, which gives him all kinds of imperial powers that remind me, unfortunately, of ancient Rome and Roman emperors. The fact that he wanted to bring the troops home from the wars, and now he's talking about extending the wars by getting involved in Syria. He got American, at least airplanes, involved in Libya. It seems like he has a special penchant for wanting to help Muslim countries, perhaps because indeed he is really a Muslim, because he was a Muslim at least at one point. There's actual documented evidence of that. And to my knowledge, he's never accepted baptism. So he still is a Muslim, at least officially, even though he went to some kind of Christian church whose pastor has since openly condemned him. One has to wonder, on whose side is he? One has to wonder, is there treason at the highest level? I don't know. I don't know the answer. I wish I could see into his heart, but I can't. I can only look at his actions, and consequently, I have to judge him and damn him. Remembering what my grandmother taught me, she used to say, your actions speak so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying. And Mr. Obama's actions speak loudly, and almost every single one of them are anti-American and are against the best interests of the common folk in the United States, against those who work hard, try to provide for their families, and who are the very backbone on which a free America is built. Those are Mr. Obama's enemies. Those are the people he's trying to destroy. Now, it's interesting that he's not only trying to destroy mainstream Judeo-Christian America, but he also is engaging in a war on persecuted Christians throughout the world. The Obama administration's support for Islamist allies means a lack of U.S. support for their enemies, or more properly, victims, the Christian and other non-Muslim minorities in the Muslim world. For example, the U.S. State Department removed the sections covering religious freedom from the country reports on human rights that it released on May 24th, 3 months past the statutory deadline Congress had set for the release of the reports. The new human rights reports are purged of the sections that discuss the status of religious freedom in each of the countries covered, and are also the human rights reports that included the period that covered the so-called Arab Spring, which of course has, as I predicted, become a summer of discontent. This was the first time ever that the State Department simply eliminated the section of religious freedom in its reports covering 2011. Legislation to create a special envoy for religious minorities in the Middle East and South Central Asia. Legislation that, in the words of the Washington Post, quote, passed the House by a huge margin. That's from Pravda Potomac. But it's been stalled in the Senate by Senator James Webb, Democrat of Virginia. He put a senatorial hold on it. That's a privilege that the senators in the majority have. In a letter sent to Webb Wednesday night, Representative Frank Wolf, a Republican from Northern Virginia, who introduced the envoy bill, said he, quote, cannot understand why, unquote, the hold had been placed on a bill which might help Coptic Christians and other groups who, quote, face daily persecution, hardship, violence, instability, and even death. Yet the ultimate source of opposition is the State Department. The Washington Post continues to report, Webb spokesman Will Jenkins explained the hold by saying that, quote, after considering the legislation, Senator Webb asked the State Department for its analysis. Great. It's like asking the Justice Department why it screwed up on Fast and Furious. In a position paper, this is one more BS document that costs a lot of taxpayer money and says very little, State Department officials responded to the murder and persecution of Christians, Buddhists, Jews, etc. in the Muslim world by saying, we oppose the bill as it infringes on Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's flexibility to make appropriate staffing decisions, and suggested the duties of Wolf's proposed envoy would overlap with several existing positions. Quote, the new special envoy position is unnecessary, duplicative, and likely counterproductive. That's the State Department's response to a Holocaust that's going on throughout the Middle East. It seems to me that if that were said, it should have been, well, I guess it probably was said by the State Department while Hitler was persecuting the Jews and while Stalin was purging various minority groups right, left, and center. The State Department doesn't really give a damn about anybody except the State Department. It certainly doesn't even care about the United States. One of the tricks we tried to pull, it was a publicity stunt, I admit, when I was in Washington, was we tried to carry an American desk into the State Department because they seemed to represent everyone's interests but our own. But the United States certainly could use diplomatic pressure to protect these persecuted minorities. There's all kinds of footage on YouTube that you can watch where in Egypt, for example, the Egyptian army is standing by blocking fire departments as Coptic Christian churches and towns are being burned to the ground by the Islamists. This is really pitiful, and America and the State Department should be ashamed of itself. Well, now we're at the top of the hour, so we'll be right back in about 6 minutes after the news. Don't go away. When we come back, we'll have Freaky Friday, and my guests will be Scott Chambers, Tim Sutton, and Ollie Neville, and we're going to discuss Finzer's generation gap. That's in 6 minutes. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. Don't go away because I'll be right back. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. I'll be broadcasting for the second hour from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia on my 5,124th day of voluntary exile in protest from an ever less free America. To comment during the program, you can send me a Skype text message at Truth and Lies Radio, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. Well, today is Freaky Friday, and that means that Scott Chambers and Tim Sutton of the Scott and Tim Show and Ollie Neville, our European co-host, are hopefully joining me on Skype for Finzer's Generation Chasm. Are you gentlemen all there? Who's there?
I'm here.
Hello.
Hello.
We're here with you.
Okay, we've got everybody. Good. We were having a little problem getting everybody connected, but we've managed to do it. I understand that Mr. Sutton has a request and wants to talk about Chick-fil-A a little bit.
Well, not actually. Wasn't looking forward to talking about Chick-fil-A, but just the fact of the matter that, a free speech rally was held at a local restaurant that happened to be owned by a Christian businessman, and let's just say that people came out in droves to support them.
Well, we've got a great picture of people in the Chick-fil-A that we're going to put up as well. I understand it's their biggest sales numbers for a single day ever.
That's correct.
So that makes everybody happy. It seems to me just to be a free speech thing. I think I think Ollie and I talked about this. I'm not sure whether we talked on radio or off radio, Ollie.
I think we talked personally about it. I was saying that so long as a company isn't actively lobbying the government, they're just saying this is what we believe, then they're free to do it. As soon as you start getting the government to try and enforce what you think, then I think that you're on dodgy grounds. But as long as you're just saying, I believe this, I don't believe this, that's fine. That, in my opinion, that you're more than welcome to do that.
Okay. So, go ahead.
I think the reason why I was there was to support the right of free speech. Because I also support the other side of the argument. But I was there to support Chick-fil-A's right to have an opinion. Listen, if Dan Cathy wants to have that opinion, go for it. That's fine. I'll still continue to eat his delicious chicken sandwiches. I think if Dan Cathy came out and said, look, I openly support homosexual marriage, I'm a homosexual. If he said that, I would still go to Chick-fil-A to get a delicious chicken sandwich. And I think it's been blown out of proportion by the liberals and by the left. And Tim has been brutally attacked on Facebook For about the past 48 hours, I was in on the conversation and finally said, hey, look, I give up. Because you cannot argue with the other side. It's impossible.
Really? So I haven't been following it. So I guess they've really savaged you, Tim.
Well, not so much. More so than anything, I just don't agree with their line of thinking. And when I do start to express my opinion on it, most people that agree with this other side, they're so negative that they won't look or listen to anything you have to say that supports your side, but the fact that you're either being, one, racist, or two, being, insubordinate to their cause, or not wanting to be equal freely across the board. And that's the problem I have with it overall when I look at this whole case, is it's not necessarily Christians battling gays. More so than anything, it should be the fact that the First Amendment right should not have clauses that calls it, toward one side or the other.
Exactly. I agree 100%. And another thing, David, being someone that does support both sides of the issue, someone that supports the other side of the issue as well, I've had people on the other side tell me that I'm wrong because I can't really support both sides. I need to be either on their side or the side of the Christians, not both, which is absolutely ludicrous. I mean, ridiculous.
Well, I think there are several questions here. I mean, one can, if we're dealing with the question of Dan Cathy's right to express his opinion, first of all, that should be unquestioned. And all this politically correct crap is one of the reasons I don't live inside the United States anymore. I don't know, but last night we were talking on the show, Ollie and I, and there was a kid in the United Kingdom who was arrested for saying something on Twitter. I mean, this is political correctness run awry. Now, one can disagree about whether or not one approves of same-sex marriages or those kinds of things, but that's what made America great, and that's the idea of freedom, is the freedom to have differing opinions. Amongst the four of us that are connected together, I'm sure we can find at least 8 opinions.
Absolutely. It's all about expressing yourself and being able to freely present your opinion.
Well, unfortunately, the clock also expresses itself, and it doesn't allow the free expression of opinion. But we will continue on this and other things on the Generation Chasm when Scott, Tim, Ollie, and I return in 5 minutes. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. This is Freaky Friday. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Don't go away. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. And I'm joined on Freaky Friday with Scott Chambers and Tim Sutton of the Scott and Tim Show, and Ollie Neville in the UK, our European co-host. And this is our Generation Chasm show, and we've been talking about free speech. And I was just sent an interesting graphic about, imagine how stupid you're going to look in 40 years. I guess it's comparing civil rights movement to the Chick-fil-A issue, right?
Yeah, to a certain extent, except if you look close, David, you'll see that it's actually from the late 50s, before the big push for actual the black or African Americans to have rights. It was more so to stop, if you'll notice, race mixing. And if you know anything about me, you know that I'm a multicultural mutt. And you just know overall that, and this was posted on my site.
You know you can't say that, Tim. You might offend someone by saying that.
Well, I called myself that, so I don't really care what any people that get offended. But this is the stupidity of the nation, and not only the nation, but a lot of people believe like this, that standing up for your rights is anything comparable to the late 50s, early 60s revolution that the African Americans pushed for their rights and freedoms as human beings. I just don't see where this even fits in. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
Well, there was a fundamental historical difference. First of all, there were specific laws regarding segregation where people, simply because of their race, were barred from certain schools, from water fountains. I remember in our little town, our doctor's office even had white and black waiting rooms. The white waiting room was air conditioned, the black one was not. In Florida, in the summer especially, that's pretty ugly. And I was in the time when the schools started to be integrated, so I know what we're talking about. We're talking about governmental discrimination. Now, governmental discrimination is evil, and everybody's entitled to protection, equal protection under the laws. But frankly, private discrimination should not be legal. And Chick-fil-A does not discriminate against gay employees or gay customers, but frankly, I believe they have a right to, because it's Dan Cathy's money, it's his company. The government did not pay him to create it or to take the risks that he's taking or to work the long hours that he worked to make it a success. And so we've really gone over the top, and it's political correctness gone. They've gone from what was called polite speech to politically correct speech, which is in fact simply a way of limiting freedom of speech.
Yeah, there's nothing polite about this at all. It's not like Bull Connor has a bunch of homosexuals in the streets of Birmingham hosing them down with fire hoses. And for the other side to take this position, I mean, it's really disgusting, and I think it's a whole new low.
Ollie, you wanted to say something. I think.
Well, I looked at that photo and I thought, well, maybe in 40 years, people will look back and say that that people who oppose gay marriage would look stupid or whatever. But that doesn't mean you should legislate against them. If you oppose something, you're perfectly free to voice your opinion. If people think you look stupid in 40 years' time, then that hurts you. But that's no reason for the government to stop you from saying it. So, I mean, personally, I would say I'm in favour of gay marriage, but if someone's opposed to it, I think you should have a sensible debate, not just sort of shut them down with insults and attacks.
Well, exactly.
My only problem overall with the fact of a gay union versus being called a gay marriage is where I have the issue. Marriage is a word that was predominantly used to describe a union between a male and a female, hence the fact the word marriage was created. But to use the same words to describe what they are doing, I have no problem with civil unions. I have no problems with the gays that want to call it a single, somewhat of a matrimony between them the two, but don't use the word marriage, a word that means something to me. I mean, to some it doesn't mean anything.
Right, no, and I agree with Tim. I think it totally means something 100%. And, what Ali said, I'm okay with gay marriage. I'm definitely fine with civil unions and what Tim was saying. But how far will we go if we start saying that, okay, civil unions are fine or marriage of a man and a man or a woman and a woman is okay? Then how far will they try to take it? Will they be petitioning churches to try to get married in their buildings?
Well, because
that could create a problem.
There's a New Zealand man that would be extremely upset because he wasn't able to marry his sheep last year. So I'm just saying, I mean, come on.
Yeah, but where would it stop? Would your church have to also give the rights to let someone marry an animal inside the church if they're a member? Because typically most religions are against gay marriage.
Well, the Episcopal Church and the Metropolitan Community Church would perform them.
Right, they certainly would. But in a Baptist church, they would not.
No.
And that's their right. I give them that. That's their right if they don't want to.
The problem with this is overall is the fact that, yes, those churches would allow it to happen, but they wouldn't be satisfied with that. They would expect to be able to come into my church that doesn't support it and be able to be given the same treatment and be able to give the same facility.
And that would be their next stronghold to file lawsuits, and then they would start moving in that direction. So where does it stop? That's just my question. And why are we being belittled for having opinions? It's wrong.
Ollie, you're talking to Americans, so you got to be rude and jump right in.
Yeah, please do, Ollie.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to say that it's not a fault of gay marriage if some people are going to take it further and try and use lawsuits to force churches to perform it. I think that that's a problem with equality laws or whatever laws that let them do that. If a church wants to perform a marriage between two men, then that's fine. And I'd also say that you can't control the word marriage. If someone wants to call their union a marriage, even if it's between, as you say, a man and a sheep, I mean, you might find that offensive because you think marriage is between a man and a woman, and you have every right to be offended. But they also have every right to describe their relationship with whatever terminology they use.
As long as the person wants to do it, yes. When they ask the government to do it, or demand that the government do it, or demand that the rest of us recognize it as such, then they're impinging upon our beliefs.
Well, I would say that the government should get out of marriage completely. I want to privatize the whole thing.
Ollie, you want to privatize everything, so that's...
Well, that's true. But
I agree, why not?
Absolutely.
Let's go
privatize
for it.
Just recognize contracts. You sign a contract with your partner, be they a man, a woman, or a sheep.
Now, wait a minute, you got to have a hoof print of the contract?
Well, if you have the contracts, there will be a hell of a lot less lawsuits when it comes to divorce.
Good point.
And that's going to be a crazy prenup that the sheep's going to make the guy sign, too. That'd be nuts.
Only shear my wool on Wednesdays. At sunset.
Well, I'll tell you a story that sort of goes against all of this, but you all know I'm practicing Eastern Orthodox. And the Russians, never let it be said that the Russians worry about being politically correct or diplomatic. Of course, the Orthodox Church does not recognize gay marriage. But one Russian Orthodox priest, somewhere in godforsaken nowhere, Russia, performed a gay marriage in church. The church's reaction was the priest was defrocked, the people were excommunicated, all of the icons were taken out of the church was desanctified, bulldozed, and then the rubble was set on fire to wipe out what the bishop considered the profanation. Now, certainly that was freedom of religion. It was maybe a little over the top, but I guess it made a point.
Yeah, I think that the problem in any of these cases is it's not the gay marriage, whatever. It's the ability for people to try and use the government to force things, to force churches that don't want to perform it. And that's not a fault of any gay marriage legislation. It's a fault of equality laws or laws that can be abused to allow these sort of things to happen. And that's where we should focus our any attacks. Not say that it will start a slippery slope. Sort of stop the slope from appearing altogether by taking out the equality laws that allow it to happen.
Well, let's go back. Let's go back in history, in U.S. history, to something. Now, maybe Tim and Scott will disagree on this, but let's look at Prohibition. Prohibition was this same slippery slope. Prohibition was almost totally an evangelical Protestant movement that wanted to enforce its beliefs about the consumption of alcohol on the rest of the world. So consequently, the only place you could drink was in Catholic and Orthodox rectories where the priests lived, because under religious freedom they could at least import wine. This is not the first time in American history that groups have done it on both sides. So, anyway, the music has come up again, so we're going to have to break now for 6 minutes for the news and a commercial, but when we come back, I'm sure we'll continue with some scintillating conversation. This is David Finzer with Scott Chambers, Tim Sutton, and Ollie Neville for Truth and Lies Radio. This is Freaky Friday. Stay tuned. We'll be freaky again. This is David Finzer on Freaky Friday. I'm joined by Scott Chambers, Tim Sutton, and Ollie Neville. We're talking about the generation chasm, and I think probably it's a good thing that we talk about the Olympics, since some of it's happening right there in Ollie's backyard. And being twice as old roughly as Scott and Tim, and almost 3 times as old as Ollie, I've seen, or at least paid attention to, a few more Olympics than y'all. It seems to me that the Olympics are actually getting more corrupt and nastier every time they're held.
Well, there's speculation at the moment that the Chinese are using genetic modification. They've gone past drug usage and they're now possibly, it's just an alleged, actually genetically modifying their athletes so they produce more muscle, they can carry more oxygen in their blood. We're going to a whole new level of how to change it and win things.
Well, that's kind of unique considering they pretty much stole that from the Russians. The only difference was instead of genetically altering them, they told them that they would genetically become mutants if they didn't. They would ship them off to, places like Serbia or maybe even closer
Siberia, Tim, Siberia.
Well, Serbia, I say that on purpose, but yes, Siberia. And they threaten them with lack of food, and and then the Chinese, they probably, I'm sure they are threatened with the death of their family members and things like that, or they're just not told about them while they're training for the Olympics, as in the new Nushan or Nushin, which is the Chinese swimmer that is, I guess, who's always talking about that is maybe genetically changed.
Well, the 16-year-old, she's amazing. I mean, this girl is amazing. Whether she's doping or not, I couldn't do that as a 30-year-old healthy man. Give me a break. But I do think there is corruption there, guys. I really do. Did anyone see the fencing star, Tim's 33rd cousin, Shinna Lam, representing South Korea? Mm-hmm. The clock apparently ran out with about 1 second left on the clock in a third overtime, and her partner in the jousting match takes one poke at her, in fencing that is, and she wins. Basically, the clock froze. And so the Olympic Committee offered her a Medal of Honor for trying to win, and she turned it down because some say, would have won had the clock operated properly. So she goes home to South Korea without a medal. Corrupt? Yeah, I think so.
Also, quit bringing my direct family members. They may be descendants, but the bottom line is also the same thing. Asians are known for cheating. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that. They think that we're just extremely smart.
She wasn't cheating, though. she was not cheating. The clock was stopped and officials did nothing.
Hang on a minute. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the badminton guys. There was 4 groups of them, 8 people total, that were throwing their matches so they could get a better draw when it came to the single elimination round.
Yeah.
Come on. I mean, give it up to us. We are smart. We learn to do things smart. It's not necessarily the best way.
Yeah, but Tim, I disagree with you actually on that, because I think the problem is with the rules, because what is the purpose of playing? The purpose is to win the medals. And so like in baseball or anything, all the sports I know in America, you have strategies. They were using a strategy. There is nothing that says you have to use your best people, your strongest players. When you get ready for the Final Four, or you get ready for the Super Bowl, or you get ready for the World Series, just to use American sports. You husband your best people. You save them. I think the problem there is the rules were screwed up. And I think the Olympics were just flat out wrong on that.
And hence my comment. They were smart about the way they did things. Because the real reasoning for doing it was so they'd get a lesser seed when it came to single elimination rounds. And in turn, they were exactly doing what they should, and that's use strategy to win. Also, want to talk about this German girl that went home early. After she had been found out that... she has ties to the neo-Nazi party back home in Germany. The Olympic Committee found out about her ties, and after she completed the Olympics, she was asked to please go home immediately.
Now, wait a minute. They let North Korea participate. They let Red China participate, and they send someone home because they have ties to a neo-Nazi party?
Yes, they let her compete. And she did all her events, but to save face at the Olympics and without this being blown up, now that she's been sent home, it's blown up bigger. But, she had ties. Her boyfriend or fiancé, soon-to-be fiancé, is the leader of a local group in Germany that is known for their neo-Nazi racism.
Okay, Ollie, this is happening in the UK. Explain it to us.
Well, it's pretty typical... UK thinking, really. If you have an opinion that we disagree with, then well, go away. We don't want to. You're not allowed to do anything if you don't perfectly conform. And it's a culture that sort of has been coming in that if you don't stick to a pre-approved political views or pre-approved comments. I mean, one of our members of Parliament, Aidan Burley, he criticised the opening ceremony of the Olympics because he said it was too multicultural and it was too left-wing. And he got a huge amount of everybody attacking him just for expressing his opinion. And they weren't saying, I disagree with you, here's why. They're saying, make a public apology, stand down, you're an awful human being.
So based on your political views, Ali, if you were the best athlete in the world in any sport, you wouldn't be allowed to participate in the London Olympics.
I think I'd be quietly asked to be...
Well, The biggest difference here between Ali and Nadia Dragela is she's really hot.
Yeah.
So I guess her boyfriend is the lucky one. She's coming home. Mama's coming home. So he's the lucky one here. But yeah, this guy runs the Rostock National Socialist. The German intelligence describes them as neo-Nazis. So she gets to go home to him. Big deal. It's ridiculous. Where's the freedom of speech at the Olympics? Doesn't happen. Speaking of freedom of speech, we talked earlier, or it was brought up in brief, about the guy that was tweeting Tom Daley, who was fighting with Tom Daley online and provoking him because he dedicated his Olympic victory or his Olympic swim to his father, who died of cancer last year. He doesn't win gold, and so the guy starts tweeting about it, making fun of him. Where's free speech? Can we talk about that when we come back briefly?
Yeah, sure. But we can do that. We talked about yesterday. We can beat that horse to death some more. I'm always in favor of that. This is David Finzer with Scott Chambers, Tim Sutton, and Ollie Neville on Freaky Friday on Truth and Lies Radio. When we come back, we'll beat that horse to death some more. So stay tuned. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. I'm joined with Scott Chambers and Tim Sutton of the Scott and Tim Show, and Ollie Neville, our European correspondent on Freaky Friday, where we're talking about the generation chasm. Scott, you wanted to talk a little bit more about the Twitter incident and the Twitter arrest.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that horrible loser Tom Daley. He let his dad down. His dad died, and he let him down. Didn't win anything in the Olympics. How sad. No, I'm sorry. I'm being a little facetious there. But this guy on Twitter sends out these nasty tweets to Tom Daley, letting him know he let his father down because his dad died of cancer and he didn't win gold. I think that's ridiculous. Somewhat funny. It's sick. But for the fact that this kid was arrested for speaking his mind on Twitter, how soon will that start happening in the United States? It's just a matter of time that we start speaking our mind on Twitter and we're arrested. It's ridiculous. This kid should have never been arrested. Ali, what do you think about it? That's your home country. Come on.
Well, it's not an isolated incident either. There are people. There was a footballer who collapsed in the middle of the pitch, had a heart attack, and someone tweeted something. I think it might have been slightly racist, but it was an offensive joke about this guy, and he got arrested and he got imprisoned for making comments about it. We can all condemn people for saying things that are disgusting, but you can't silence them. You can stop listening to them. You can, make sure everyone knows their disgusting opinions, but to actively get them arrested and silenced is just beyond the pale.
Well, according to a news report, the kid ultimately apologized, sent tweets apologizing.
Oh yeah, I think it was done in lightheartedness. I think he didn't really mean for it to be out to be harmful. But I want to say this. I'm going to go ahead and say it. I want to tweet this to the world. Michael Phelps let down Morgan Freeman.
How was that?
And you guys being overseas,
I don't know what you mean.
You don't know what
I have no idea what on earth you're talking about, Tim, but that's about 50% of the time anyway.
I know. You don't watch TV over there. I don't even think you get TV, and if you do, you get it in 25-year tape delay.
I know where this is going now.
But what I'm getting at is there was a commercial that aired multiple times before the Olympics and up until the first race that Michael Phelps ran. Morgan Freeman got on, or swam. Anyways, before he got on and did the event, Morgan Freeman and City Life had a commercial running saying, "What if lightning strikes twice?" And all this stuff. And
it was more of a deeper voice, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
What if lightning strike? Yes, yeah.
But immediately after he failed to win, they pulled the commercial.
Yes, they did.
So, in my opinion, he upset Morgan Freeman.
And Morgan Freeman's, 20-year-old daughter, who's also his wife. Let her down, too.
Absolutely.
It seems like people have found this right not to be offended.
Yeah.
I don't remember that in my generation. Of course, I think since the world's become more violent, I have a libertarian solution. I think that dueling should be legalized. And I think they should take stadiums or areas where you go in, you sign a release, and you can go and fight it out any way you want. Nothing happens. If everybody goes in voluntarily, let them work it out of their system. Let the police just stay out of this.
Well, I think if dueling were legal, there would be no Scott and Tim show because we would have murdered each other by now. So
that might be a good thing for humanity then.
You want to repeat that, Ollie?
I said maybe it'd be a good thing for humanity then.
Probably improve the gene pool. I'm not sure. But, it seems like the government the government wants to be involved in everything. They found this right not to be offended, which is directly against the right of freedom of speech.
But the problem is, it's not necessarily just the government, it's people's opinions. They've started the general public opinion is that you have a right not to be offended now. It's not just the authorities coming and clamping down. It's people saying we want the government to do this. When the guy was tweeting about Tom Daley, there were all sorts of people saying, get him arrested, arrest this scum and stuff. And I've heard people just when I was walking about in London saying, I see they've arrested that guy. I'm glad that he's behind bars now. And you're just like, what?
Yeah, the world's so much safer with this kid behind bars. I feel safe now.
Exactly. The sad thing about this whole issue is that he just tweeted what most people were thinking. Yeah. And that's the sad part. You can't tell me, as an Englishman that heard his comment, the first thing that came to your mind was, damn, I bet his dad's kind of pissed. Or I bet he's rolling over in his grave. We say it all the time here in the U.S., but maybe you guys in England are a little bit ahead of the par. You're not so prude as we are here, or you are prude.
We're just sick and twisted. Here. That's what we are.
Yeah, exactly.
Sick and twisted. But no, I think government overextends the reach, guys. They really do. I mean, a new law here in our town that Tim and I broadcast from, the government, once again, it's local government, but they're extending their reach way too far. They're telling me how loud I can turn my speakers up because what I'm listening to might offend someone, so you can only have it at certain audio levels now. If I'm listening to my latest Snoop Lion CD, I have to keep the volume turned down just a little bit. Government is overextending reach.
And with that said, David, do you even know who we were talking about? Did you catch the last Chronic album? Snoop Doggy Dogg's album, which is no longer...
He's now Snoop Dogg. Now he is Snoop Lion.
Snoop Lion. Mm-hmm. And the new reggae album's going to be impressive. I'm so pumped.
Oh, I love it.
I have no idea, but actually I have an idea for our next week's show that I want to throw out now while I've got everybody together. Each generation thinks the younger generation's music stinks. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
And what I'd like to do is I would like each of you to bring up a couple of, and I'll pick a couple of my favorites, and then let's talk about each one of our favorites' music, and let's see how big the generation chasm is there, because I suspect that one is going to make the Grand Canyon look like a drainage ditch.
Yeah, Bach is so much better than Chopin. I'm just telling you that now.
Well, with all the three of us, David, Tim, and myself, being Southern gentlemen, there's a lot of music that we have in common. There's a lot of things that we have in common there, music-wise. But I still say that the 90s were the best. Alternative rock from the 90s was the best.
Oh, yeah.
Blink-182, that was the stuff. Green Day, back in the day, that was the music. But, yeah, we'll get into that next week. And Snoop Lion's pretty good, too. He might be heading to American Idol.
And Ollie, I'm sure you're going to have some great ideas.
Well, my music taste is very eclectic. I like an awful lot of stuff from the 80s, but then lots of, there's modern stuff that I quite happily listen to. So I'm sure we'll get into a great debate about the generation chasm.
Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and say it here too, Ollie. The Sex Pistols are horrible. Worst group in music. But,
don't get any praise from me there.
okay, I got you. So you must be a Misfits fan or something of that nature.
I think you're
Have you? Yeah, Scott don't even know who the Sex Pistols are, but anyways.
I'm looking forward to hearing what music was like back in the 1820s when David was born.
Actually, it was the 1850s.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yes. Don't make me any older than I am. That's usually Mike Guard's job.
When David was a child, he dreamed of the day they would have an electronic harp.
Yeah.
When I was a child, I dreamed of the day when they'd have color TV.
Well, see, when I was a child, I was so damn poor, I wanted to have a color TV. They existed. I just couldn't afford one.
Okay, well, that, I don't know. The world just, everybody says the world's getting worse. And I think objectively it is, unfortunately. I don't think I think old in most things, although some of my mores are from an older generation, and I am an archaicist, but I think objectively the world is an uglier place, a less free place. And there was a word someone mentioned earlier on. I didn't get to jump on them right then. I don't even remember who. I think though it was one of the dynamic duo from Alabama, but they used the word equality, and I think that is a big culprit because people have extended the word equality to include not being offended, to include all kinds of socialist and governmental interference to force equality.
Yeah, when I think of equality, I think of like how we let women vote or something, which was probably a mistake also. But
well, I always used to say it was Wyoming's fault. They're the one who started it.
My wife does listen. Just be careful, Scott. She knows where you live and sleep at night. But I will say this, and over time, especially with music, I have learned to have a respect for all music.
Yeah.
Throughout the ages, as long as it is performed by an artist and actually produced by an artist.
None of this electronica.
The stuff that you see today is not an artist. It's not even a person singing on the track.
Well, one of my friends who was really into electronic music said he liked Bach because it sounded most like techno. So I don't know. Anyway, with that, we're running out of time. So I remind everybody, remember, you only have 3 choices: give up, fight back, or get out. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio.